I walked into my company's routine medical exam the same way I do every year, calm and certain that nothing unexpected could touch me. The clinic smelled like that strong disinfectant that always reminds me of childhood appointments. I gave the nurse my usual polite smile, the one I use when life feels steady and predictable. And honestly, I thought the day would end just as it began. But hours later, back home with a warm mug of tea in my hand, everything about that certainty cracked. It happened the second I saw the clinic's email sitting in my inbox. Before I even clicked it, something inside me tightened, like my body sensed a storm my mind hadn't caught up to yet. When I opened it and read the words, "positive for an STD," it felt like the air around me froze. My hands trembled, not wildly, just that quiet, stunned shaking you get when reality doesn't make sense. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. I kept rereading the line, hoping the letters might rearrange themselves into something less impossible. But they stayed there, cold and cutting. And in that moment, I reached for logic the way someone drowning reaches for the nearest piece of wood. I told myself it had to be a mistake, that labs mix things up all the time, right? I dialed the clinic with my voice barely steady, clinging to the hope that someone would say the test was wrong. But as I waited for the nurse to pick up, a strange pressure built in my chest, like a warning that whatever came next wouldn't fit into the safe little life I thought I knew. When the nurse finally answered, her voice was gentle, almost apologetic, and that only made my stomach sink deeper. I explained everything, my certainty, my confusion, my absolute disbelief, and I waited for her to reassure me. Instead, she said the words I was terrified to hear. "The test is accurate." It was like someone had knocked the air straight out of my lungs. I insisted there had to be another explanation, something technical, something rational. But she suggested I talk to my partner, and hearing that made my heart slam against my ribs. I remember gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles went white as I told her. My partner is my husband. He's the only person I've ever been with. The silence that followed was worse than the diagnosis. It felt like she already knew the truth I wasn't ready to see. When the call ended, I stood in the middle of my kitchen, surrounded by all the little pieces of our life together, pictures on the fridge, his jacket on the chair, and suddenly none of it felt familiar. It was as if my home had shifted under my feet, but I refused to let panic swallow me whole. I told myself I needed facts, not fears. So I booked another exam at a private clinic, telling myself I just needed confirmation to clear up the mistake. Still, on the drive there, my mind kept spiraling into places I didn't want to visit. I kept replaying the nurse's tone, that careful softness people use when they know something you don't want to admit. And with every mile, it got harder to push away the quiet suspicion forming in the back of my mind, waiting to grow into something bigger. Sitting in the waiting room of the private clinic, I could feel my leg bouncing uncontrollably, like my body was trying to release a truth I still refused to hear. The walls were too white, the lights too bright, and every sound felt amplified. The clicking pens, the distant footsteps, even my own breathing. I kept staring at the door, willing the doctor to walk through and tell me everything was fine. But beneath that wish, a cold fear was blooming slowly, the kind that doesn't shout but whispers relentlessly, and those whispers were getting harder to ignore. I thought about my husband, about the trust I had wrapped around our marriage like a warm blanket, believing it would always hold. I remembered the nights he came home late, the excuses, the tired smiles I never questioned. Back then, they were just ordinary moments. But in that waiting room, those same moments began to feel sharp, like tiny shards of a puzzle I had never bothered to assemble. My heartbeat thudded in my chest as I wondered if I had missed signs that now seemed painfully obvious. When the doctor finally called my name, I stood up with legs that felt heavier than my own body. Walking into that room, I felt the air shift, the way it does right before something breaks for good. And even though I tried to steady my breath, a part of me knew I was about to hear the kind of truth that doesn't just hurt, it rearranges everything you thought you knew about your life. The moment I stepped into the doctor's office, I could feel the temperature drop, as if the room already knew what I was about to hear. He looked at me with that careful, measured expression doctors use when preparing to deliver something heavy. I sat down slowly, my fingers gripping the edge of the chair as if it could anchor me to a reality that was slipping fast. When he said my name, soft, almost gentle, I felt my throat tighten. And before I could even form a question, he told me the truth I had prayed wouldn't come. He confirmed the diagnosis, just like that. No hesitation, no uncertainty. My breath caught in my chest and I could barely manage the words. No, that can't be right. I felt the room tilt, like my equilibrium had abandoned me, leaving nothing but a ringing in my ears. The doctor kept talking, explaining things I already knew deep down, but wasn't ready to accept. The only way to contract this is through sexual contact, he said, and those words landed like a blow straight to my heart. It was as if he had just said my marriage wasn't real. I walked out of the clinic in complete silence, my steps heavy, my mind spinning in frantic circles. The sunlight outside felt too bright, too cheerful for the chaos unraveling inside me. When I reached my car, I closed the door and everything inside finally cracked open. That's when the truth hit me like a truck. Sudden, violent, undeniable. And sitting there alone, gripping the steering wheel, I whispered the words I never imagined would belong to my life. In the quiet of my car, the words slipped out of me before I could stop them. He cheated. He actually cheated. Hearing myself say it made everything feel terrifyingly real, like naming the wound allowed it to finally bleed. I felt my chest tighten, that painful squeeze that comes when betrayal hits deeper than you ever expected. Part of me wanted to scream, part of me wanted to disappear, and part of me just sat there numb, staring at nothing. It was strange, how heartbreak can feel like both a fire and a void at the same time. And in that moment, both lived inside me. I thought about all the years we'd built together, the promises whispered in the dark, the mundane routines that felt like safety. And now, every memory felt contaminated, like someone had dipped my entire past into something toxic. My mind raced through moments that once felt innocent. Late-night texts he hid, sudden showers after working late, the way he avoided eye contact some mornings. They all came rushing back, not as coincidences anymore, but as clues I never realized were clues. And the realization cut deeper than the diagnosis itself. Then came the fury, slow at first, like embers waking up after being stepped on for too long. It rose through me, warm and steady, giving me back a piece of myself I didn't know I'd lost. I wasn't just heartbroken anymore. I was angry. Angry that he risked my health. Angry that he lied to my face. Angry that I trusted him enough to never question anything. And that anger didn't burn me. It built me, shaping something inside that felt stronger than the fear. By the time I started the car, the anger had settled into something colder, sharper, almost surgical. It wasn't the kind of rage that makes you act recklessly. It was the kind that clears your vision, strips away illusions, and forces you to see a person exactly as they are. I gripped the steering wheel and felt a strange steadiness settle into my bones. For the first time since opening that email, I wasn't confused. I wasn't scared. I knew what had happened, and I knew what needed to come next, even if I wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. Driving home, the world outside felt muted, like I was watching it through glass. People walked their dogs, kids played in yards, cars passed by, life happening normally, completely unaware that mine was splitting open. I replayed the doctor's words over and over, each repetition tightening something inside me. And beneath all of that noise, one thought kept rising to the surface, louder every time. I have to confront him. That idea sat heavy in my chest, equal parts dread and necessity, pushing me toward the truth I couldn't avoid anymore. When I parked outside my house, I didn't get out right away. I sat there, staring at the front door, remembering the countless evenings I'd walked through it believing I was safe, believing I was loved. But that door didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like the entrance to a lie I'd been living without knowing it. I took a slow breath, feeling my heartbeat steady even as my hands tingled with adrenaline. And in that stillness, I realized something powerful was beginning to shift inside me, something that would shape everything that happened next. I walked through the front door earlier than usual, and the moment it clicked shut behind me, the whole house felt different. Too quiet, too staged, like a set waiting for the actors to ruin the script. Evan was in the kitchen cooking dinner, humming softly, completely unaware of the storm walking straight toward him. For a second, I just watched him move around, and it hit me how easy it was for him to live normally, while my entire world was collapsing. The smell of garlic and olive oil filled the air, warm and familiar, but it only made my stomach twist tighter. Nothing about this scene felt like my life anymore. When he looked up and saw me, his smile flickered with surprise. "You're home early," he said, wiping his hands on a towel like this was any other evening. I remember standing there, frozen between wanting to scream and wanting to disappear. Instead, my voice came out cold and steady, almost frighteningly so. "I got the company health results," I told him, watching the color drain from his face. I could feel my pulse in my throat, heavy and loud, as if my own body was bracing for the impact of what would happen next. He stepped closer, trying to read my expression, probably searching for the version of me who trusted him without question. But she wasn't standing there anymore. I felt like a different woman altogether, one who had been pushed past the point of pretending. "Yeah? And?" he asked, forcing a casual tone that didn't match the fear rising in his eyes. And in that small pause, in that fragile inhale before I answered, I realized this moment would crack our marriage in half, no matter how he tried to spin it. I looked him straight in the eyes and said the words I knew would slice through whatever fantasy he was clinging to. "I tested positive for an STD." The spoon slipped from his hand and clattered against the floor, echoing through the kitchen like a truth he couldn't outrun anymore. For a moment, all he did was stare at me, his jaw tightening, his lips parting as if searching for a lie that might still save him. But there was nothing left for him to hide behind. "That's impossible," he whispered, but his voice cracked, and that crack was louder than anything he could have said. I felt something inside me snap, not in a chaotic way, but in a clean, decisive one. "Exactly," I told him, "because I only sleep with you." His face paled, his eyes darting away, and that tiny, cowardly movement told me more than any confession ever could. It was like watching guilt rise to the surface, inch by inch, until it coated every expression he tried to fake. The kitchen suddenly felt suffocating, filled with the weight of every unanswered question I'd ignored for years. And all I could think was, how long has he been lying to me? He tried to stutter out excuses, false tests, lab mistakes, anything that might shield him from the truth he knew I already had. But I cut him off. I took another one. Same result. His shoulders collapsed slightly, as if the last excuse had been ripped from his hands. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loaded, screaming, undeniable. My anger surged, burning through every inch of restraint I still held. "Stop lying and tell me who she is," I demanded, my voice trembling not from fear, but from all the power I'd reclaimed in that moment. He didn't answer, not with words at least. He just sat down slowly at the kitchen table, his hands trembling as he pressed them together, avoiding my eyes like a child caught stealing. And that silence, it was louder than any confession he could have spoken. I kept waiting, hoping for honesty, even if it came dressed in misery. But instead, he looked down, shoulders slumped, letting the truth speak for him. And it did. It shouted. It confirmed every suspicion, every memory, every quiet doubt I had tried to ignore. His silence was the name he refused to give me. Standing there, watching him crumble without taking responsibility, I felt a strange detachment wash over me. It was like my heart stepped out of my body, choosing self-preservation over sentiment. I realized I wasn't waiting for an explanation anymore. I was taking inventory of a man I no longer recognized. The betrayal wasn't just the cheating. It was the cowardice, the refusal to face what he'd done, the way he hid behind silence while I stood there bleeding from wounds he created, and seeing him like that made something inside me shift forever. I turned away from him, feeling my breath shake but my spine straighten. That kitchen wasn't ours anymore. It was just a scene where the truth finally arrived late but merciless. I knew then that whatever happened next wouldn't be about salvaging us. It would be about salvaging myself. My hands were still trembling, but now for a different reason. Not fear, not confusion. Something stronger, something awakening. And as I walked toward the hallway, I felt the first spark of clarity about what I needed to do next. When I finally walked upstairs to pack my bags, it wasn't dramatic or frantic the way people imagine heartbreak looks. It was quiet, almost graceful, like I was moving through the ashes of a life that had already burned down without my permission. Every drawer I opened felt like revisiting a memory I no longer belonged to. Shirts we bought together, photos we took, promises tucked into the simplest objects. But I folded everything with a calm I didn't recognize, like peace had stepped in where pain had lived just hours before. And somehow, that calm scared him more than anger ever could. Evan stood in the doorway watching me, confusion and fear twisting across his face as if he couldn't understand how quickly everything had shifted. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice thin, desperate. I didn't even look up while zipping my suitcase. "Away from you," I said, and the words tasted cleaner than any truth I'd spoken in years. He rushed forward, babbling about fixing things, about talking, about forgiving. But forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's a grave you bury after someone kills the version of you who trusted them. And my trust had been pronounced dead hours ago. What he didn't know, what he could never predict, was the shape my revenge would take. Not screaming, not throwing his things, not ruining his job or blasting his secrets to the world. No. What I wanted was deeper, more precise, something that would land exactly where his ego lived. His parents. The people whose approval he worshipped like a religion. The only voices he truly valued. As I picked up my phone, his face drained of color, and for the first time since the diagnosis, I felt something inside me sharpen with purpose. When Evan realized who I was calling, real panic hit him. Not the shallow kind he used during arguments, but the raw, unfiltered fear of a man about to lose the only approval he ever lived for. "Rachel, please, don't call them," he begged, reaching for my wrist as if he could physically stop the truth from leaving my mouth. I pulled away, slow and deliberate, watching his face collapse in on itself. I'd never seen him so small, not even during our worst fights. And for once, I didn't feel guilty. I felt justified. It was the first moment where the scales finally tipped back toward me. I stepped outside onto the driveway, letting the cool air hit my skin like a reset button. My hands shook just a little, but my voice didn't when I placed the call. His mother answered with that warm tone she always used with me, the one that used to make me feel part of something bigger than the two of us. "Sweetheart, what happened?" she asked, and the tenderness in her voice almost broke me. But truth deserves a clear voice. "He cheated on me," I said, "and he gave me an STD." The gasp on the other end of the line was sharp enough to cut through the night air. Then I heard his father in the background, stern, proud, a man who raised his son to be better than this. "Put him on the phone, now." His anger wasn't chaotic, it was controlled and icy, the kind that weighs more than shouting ever could. I could practically feel Evan shrinking inside the house as his parents' voices spilled through the speaker. I told them I was leaving, that I needed them to know who their son really was. And for the first time since all of this began, I felt power settle into me like a breath I'd been holding for years. When I hung up the phone, the silence in the driveway felt different. Lighter, almost spacious, like I had finally stepped out of a room I didn't realize had been suffocating me. Inside the house, I heard Evan shouting my name, his voice cracking under the weight of consequences he never imagined facing. "Rachel, what did you do?" he yelled, as if I were the one who had detonated our marriage. I turned toward the house, watching him appear in the doorway, pale and frantic. And for the first time, he looked like the one who'd been betrayed, not me. The irony tasted almost sweet. I met his panic with complete calm, a calm that seemed to terrify him more than any accusation ever could. "I did the only thing that truly hurts you," I said, my voice steady, almost gentle. His parents' disappointment hit him harder than the truth itself. I could see it in the way his chest rose too fast, like he couldn't catch his breath. All those years he spent chasing their approval, molding himself into the son they wanted. Gone. Just gone. And he knew it. That realization washed over him, leaving him small and broken on the threshold of the life he'd taken for granted. I walked away without rushing, without looking back, feeling the weight of my suitcase but none of the weight of him anymore. My steps felt deliberate, as if each one peeled another layer of him off my skin. And as I reached my car, I felt something I hadn't felt since before the diagnosis, space inside my chest. Not forgiveness, not relief, but something that looked a lot like freedom waiting to arrive. I started the engine, knowing this wasn't the end of his collapse. Not yet. And part of me knew the aftermath wouldn't be mine to carry anymore. I rented a small apartment that same night, a place that smelled faintly of fresh paint and possibility. The moment I walked in, I felt the quiet hit me, not the heavy kind that follows heartbreak, but a gentler silence that almost felt like a welcome. I put my suitcase on the floor and ran my hand across the clean countertop, noticing how the space didn't hold any of his shadows. No reminders, no memories, no echoes of lies. Just blank walls and air that finally belonged to me. And for the first time in weeks, my lungs filled all the way. I changed the sheets on the bed, crisp and cool, listening to their soft rustle like it was some kind of ritual. Each small act, placing a glass in the cupboard, turning on the lamp, opening the window, felt strangely sacred. It was as if I was rebuilding myself through these tiny, ordinary motions. I took one long look around the room, the city light slipping through the curtains, and allowed myself a single deep breath. Not of victory, not of closure, just of presence, as if my body was finally catching up to the decision my heart made hours ago. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed endlessly from across the room. I didn't have to check it to know who it was. Evan's name kept lighting up the screen like a haunting I no longer feared. Each vibration felt like another piece of him unraveling somewhere far away from me. And a strange clarity washed over me. His downfall was beginning, but it wasn't mine to witness anymore. I stood there listening to the phone hum against the table, realizing that silence was becoming my new form of freedom. When I finally checked my phone, it wasn't just missed calls. It was dozens of voicemails, all from Evan. His words poured out in frantic bursts, his voice shaking in a way I had never heard before. "Rachel, please. They won't speak to me," he said in one message, desperation dripping from every syllable. In another, he begged, "You destroyed me. Please help me fix this." Listening to him crumble through the speaker was surreal. This wasn't the confident, composed man I had built my life with. This was someone unraveling, undone by a truth he created with his own hands. I sat on the floor beside the bed, the phone warm against my palm, feeling an unexpected stillness settle inside me. It wasn't satisfaction, and it wasn't pity. It was closure taking shape quietly, without asking for attention. Part of me remembered how much I once loved him, how deeply I believed in our marriage, and how fiercely I protected it. But that memory felt distant now, like a story I'd been told about another woman. The one sitting in this apartment wasn't her anymore. She was someone who had survived a truth big enough to break her, and chose not to let it. The final voicemail was the one that struck me the most. His voice was barely above a whisper, cracked and hollow. "Please, just help me fix things with them. I can't lose them, Rachel." And hearing that, I realized something profound. I had spent years trying not to lose myself for his sake. Now he was losing the one thing he valued more than me, and he couldn't bear the weight of it. I deleted the message slowly, feeling the decision settle into my chest like a quiet, steady heartbeat. After deleting that last voicemail, I set the phone down gently, almost ceremonially, as if I were placing the final piece of a story I no longer needed to reread. A soft breeze slipped through the window and brushed against my skin, carrying the scent of rain from somewhere far away. I leaned back against the bed, feeling the quiet pulse of the room wrap around me like a blanket woven from my own resilience. And in that stillness, I whispered to myself the truth I had been avoiding since the very beginning. He didn't care about my health, my body, or my trust. So I no longer needed to care about his approval or his collapse. I stood up and walked across the small apartment, letting my fingers glide along the windowsill, the texture cool and grounding under my touch. It was strange how a space so unfamiliar could feel more like home than the house I had lived in for years. Maybe because this place didn't hold secrets. It didn't hold lies. It held only me, my breath, my choices, my dignity. I caught my reflection in the window, the city lights flickering behind me, and for the first time in weeks, I saw strength instead of strain. A quiet strength, the kind that grows in the dark before anyone notices. When I finally sat on the edge of the bed, a small smile tugged at my lips. Not a triumphant one, not a vengeful one. Just a simple, real smile. The kind that comes when the weight you've been carrying finally slips off your shoulders. My revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic. It was precise, personal, and absolutely mine. And as I lay back on the fresh sheets, listening to the soft hum of the city below, I realized something profound. Freedom doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives in steady breaths, in quiet choices, in the moment you decide your peace matters more than someone else's chaos.